Hello, everybody. This is Dorian Payne, Managing Director of Castell Group, and I am very pleased to be here today with Paul Smith, who is the Managing Director of Strategic Land Group, and he's also a Director of the Land Planning and Development Federation, which is an industry body that represents businesses that promote land through the planning system for development. Paul, thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, Dorian. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's nice to meet you.
No, my pleasure. So I thought I'd get Paul on to do a video with us, an interview, because he wrote a thought-provoking piece, an article a few months back in June, called "The Ministers Must Do More to Provide Certainty Around Planning." Now, I know the landscape's changed a bit since then, which we'll touch on, but it is thought-provoking because we are property developers ourselves. We are land-led. We mainly focus on land that's already in the settlement boundary, rather than promoting new land which we can touch on. But every developer I speak to, and for ourselves, we've had nothing but problems, really, delays, challenges, complexities, and I just thought it'd be great for my audience and other developers out there to get your stance on a few questions, really, Paul.
Yeah, great stuff.
Good. So, I mean, to kickstart us off then, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, so as you said, I'm the Managing Director of Strategic Land Group. I'm a chartered town planner and a chartered surveyor as well. I mean, the Strategic Land Group, we're a land promotion company. So what we do is we promote land through the local plan process on behalf of landowners, with a view to getting planning permission and then selling it on. So we're heavily involved in the plan production side of the planning system as well as the application stage, which sort of goes some way to explaining my hairline, I think, doesn't it? But,
I think for anybody looking at this is not my real hair. This is a wig. So yeah. No, thanks for that. And Strategic Land Group's been going for quite some time now, isn't it?
It's our 15th year this year. Yeah, so we've been going for quite a long time. So that's 15 years. It sounds a long time, but there's plenty of local authorities that haven't managed to get a local plan adopted in that period of time. So it's not all that long in the planning world, is it?
I was going to say, you still promoting sites through from your first year?
We do well to get agreements with landowners that are that long, but there certainly are some authorities that we were working in 15 years ago that still haven't got any closer to adopting a local plan today.
Wow, and really that is the crux of one of the fundamental points of this talk, really, Paul, is that hopefully you'll agree with me on this, but I would say we're in a housing crisis. There is a substantial amount of new homes needing to be built per year that aren't being built. We're in the social sector, and that problem is just growing year by year. So obviously planning is a fundamental part of that, because you need planning permission to legally build new homes. So it was, like I said, it's great to have you on. And in your article, you touched on, back then in June, the complexities and the need for more change or certainty. Now, I know the landscape's changed a bit. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so my sort of cry for help back in June, if I can put it that, it was prompted by some of the trends we're now seeing in planning, in the number of planning consents being granted, and entrenched trends. So we've seen the number of new homes granted planning permission fall for the last 7 or 8 years, every year for the last 7 or 8 years. We've also seen the number of new local plans coming into force fall every year for the last 5 years, and the number that were adopted last year, I think, was the lowest in about a decade. And those two things are related. The planning system is the gatekeeper of new housing development. I know planners and local authorities tend not to build the homes. It is usually private organisations, but you can't build it without planning permission. The planning system is the gatekeeper.
Of course.
And it's no surprise if new plans aren't coming into force, which are identifying new sites for development and with up-to-date housing targets, that the number of planning permissions will fall as a consequence of that. And one of the reasons why we've seen the number of local plans sort of dry up over that period is, back in 2020, if we can remember that far back,
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah. Um, the summer of 2020, it was August because I was on holiday. The government published Planning for the Future, their white paper about how they were going to fundamentally reform the planning system. And actually, it's only now, in September 2023, that we've started to see what those changes will look like. And local authorities, or many local authorities in that intervening period, have understandably taken the view that they don't want to go and spend £2 or £3 million preparing a new local plan when it could be immediately out of date because they don't know what the new system's going to look like. So we've seen that plan making process dry up, and that is one of the the key factors why we're seeing fewer planning permissions being granted. There's all sorts of other things as well about nutrient neutrality and the fact that local authorities in general, the planning teams are massively under-resourced, so it's harder for them to process applications even when they are policy compliant. There's loads of other context there, but fundamentally it's been that expectation of changes to the planning system, and a changing expectation. We've gone from Planning for the Future, which was quite pro-development, to some potential changes to national planning policy, which Michael Gove proposed just before Christmas, that were at the other extreme, that were talking about making housing targets mandatory, that were talking about 5-year supply, or the requirement for authorities to maintain a 5-year supply to be watered down. And that's a significant, it's a crucial sort of check and balance in the system, that if a local plan isn't working, 5-year supply enables the supply of homes to continue rather than having to wait for a new plan to come into force. So, it is understandable, but thankfully we're starting to see some progress now. There's been the consultation on changes to the plan making system, and some quite big changes there, and some quite good changes, I think, with slimmed down local plans, more firmer processes and timescales around them, earlier involvement from the planning inspectorate to make sure that authorities don't get it too wrong, and spend years doing the wrong things. It should keep them on track and make plans be adopted more quickly. But because that in and of itself doesn't yet remove the reason for many authorities to not progress plans, because it's going to be the autumn of next year, we're told, before the regulations and guidance for that new system are in place. So there's very little that local authorities can do up until that point anyway.
No, that's it's, as you say, over 3 years since autumn, August 2020. I mean, it was quite good going to get on holiday at that point. I'm pretty sure it must have just been through one of those lockdown windows or something.
Well, it was good going to Getaway. We were in the 2-week period where you could travel abroad, and then they changed the quarantining rules the day before we got back. We had to do 40 days of quarantine when we got back in the UK. So I'm not sure we would have gone if we'd known. But anyway,
swings and roundabouts. But and you touched on there as well the housing targets, and I say 3 years has flown by in a flash. But ultimately, as you've said, understandably, a lot of movement. There has been a lack of movement because just uncertainty, just lack of clarity and uncertainty of what's happening, what is expected. And, I read a stat very recently, very particular for our business. Shelter has announced that there's over 90,000 people on the waiting list in Wales, on the housing waiting list, whereas in 2020, that was 67,000, also published by Shelter. So in theory, if those stats are correct, and again, I know, but it's from the same source. So if those stats are correct, that means that through various things, the housing waiting list has increased by 23,000 people approximately, which is massive in Wales, especially when the new housing target per year for social housing is only 4,000 a year. Even if we hit the target, we would still be over double behind. It's fascinating. So come touching on the target you mentioned, where this mandatory target changed to advisory target, that obviously that's going to have a negative impact on the delivery you think they do that because they don't want to be shown that they're behind, or what?
I mean, it's a great question. The government's political objective for new homes in England is 300,000 homes a year, and I choose that phrase political objective rather than housing target deliberately because it doesn't really have any weight in planning policy terms. If you look at the housing target, the aggregate housing target in all the local plans in England, it comes to about 230,000 homes a year. That's the number of homes we're actually planning to deliver. And we've been planning to deliver around that many homes for a long time. So if you look back 15 years to 2010, when regional spatial strategies were abolished, between them, the RSSs and the London plan at that time were aiming to deliver about 210,000 homes across the whole of England. So nowhere near to the 300,000 figure. And that's important because you can't build a home without planning permission. And you can see the impact of those figures on delivery rates, that we have struggled to build more than about 240,000 homes a year for the last 15, 20 years. The average over that period is something like 190,000 per annum. And we see delivery rates decline when the market is poor, which is what you would expect. And we see them climb when the market is good, which is what you would expect. But they hit a ceiling around that 230,000 per annum mark, which is what we're planning to deliver. And there should be no surprise there. And actually, 300,000 probably isn't enough homes anyway. There's loads of research out there that's been done by people like Centre for Cities, looking at how many homes we should be planning to deliver. Andrew Weston, who's a Labour MP, has been using that to advocate for a housing target of 500,000 homes a year. And that's simply because we have fewer homes than most other countries. You look at France, for instance, and if we had the same number of homes per capita as they have in France, we would have 6 million more, which is a huge number. And that's not because France is bigger and has more space. There's only single-digit percentage of England that is developed. It's because we haven't planned to deliver enough. So why is the government making housing targets, or proposing to make housing targets optional rather than mandatory? Well, I think it comes down to the fact that new homes aren't popular with large segments of the electorate. And we saw the by-election result in Chesham and Amersham. I think it was a couple of years ago. It seems a long time ago, but I think it was only a couple of years, where the Conservatives lost a huge majority to the Liberal Democrats, essentially on the back of opposition to their proposed changes to the planning system. And there were enough local residents there who were worried that there would be too many new homes built near where they lived, that it caused the MP to it caused a change of the party that returned the MP. And we see it in council elections. We see local authorities where control is lost by one party to another because of campaigning against housing development plans. We've seen a rise of independent council groups taking control of councils that are essentially running on no development platforms. So that makes it very difficult, actually, politically very difficult to be advocating for building the number of homes that we really need to, despite all of the impacts. But you talked about some of the social impacts and people on affordable housing waiting lists and desperate need of sort of submarket homes. But there are environmental impacts too, because it does things like increases commuting distances and increases pollution. And there are huge economic impacts. The amount of, Kate Barker talked about this in her review sort of 20 years ago now, the unaffordability of homes and the lack of enough homes in the strongest economic parts of the country acts as an economic drag. And when we're desperate for economic growth, both parties are scrabbling around for ways to deliver economic growth. That's a really good way of helping to deliver some of that.
I think there are some excellent points, and definitely points that we've experienced as well. Just a couple of things to touch on that. As you said, in terms of some of the target data, I briefly mentioned in this video about the 4,000 home kind of a target for social housing in Wales. That was set back in 2016, and it is still the target today. but the world and the landscape is completely different. So it's really quite outdated data, in my opinion. And and also, as you've said, and as you've probably experienced, every development, it's very rare that we'll do a development or take it through the planning system where we won't have community objections. That's always kissing our job to try to manage that. But in some cases, community lobbying their local councillor who's putting pressure on the planning committee members. And even though it's recommended for approval through all the consultees and even the planning officer, which is a very difficult point to get to sometimes and unpredictable, it's still being met with opposition anyway because of what I found is people they don't like change. Now, I'm not trying to do that as a broad brush approach, but I've found that the majority of time they just don't want it there. They want housing elsewhere, not where they are. And it's a difficult and sensitive one to manage. But if they're not bringing in new plans, developers like ourselves are focusing still on, if the settlement boundary hasn't changed for years, then what can you do but find other slots to increase density within that settlement? It's very difficult. It all kind of is a spiral, isn't it?
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, there's quite a lot to unpack there, really. And I think there are definitely lots of misconceptions about development and the housing market. And one of the objections that's often made is that new homes are unaffordable because they are they're expensive, and therefore that isn't what we need. We need more affordable homes, and undoubtedly we need to make sure that there is an adequate supply of submarket homes available at submarket prices for those that otherwise would not be able to afford them. But we also have one of the highest levels of social housing stock of anywhere in the developed world. So it can't just be that, can it? And what we know there's some great research being done in Helsinki and in New York, and I think somebody did it in somewhere in Holland as well, that shows how even building really expensive new homes at the top of the market improves the availability of more affordable homes further down the market. And it's common sense when you stop and think about it. It's the housing ladder that we all talk about. Yeah. And if you build another rung at the top of the ladder, everybody climbs up a step and frees up the rung at the bottom. The academics call it filtering, but that's essentially what's happening. By building market housing, everybody shuffles up a bit into the house that they would more prefer to have, freeing up more affordable stock in more affordable areas of towns and cities. So I think that's a really important point that people need to understand a bit more. I think it's also the case, you were talking about local objections that you can get, and councillors making decisions against officers' recommendation, and this is where we get a conflict between political expediency and long-term planning. And every single housing development creates some harm, but every single housing development generates benefit as well. And the job of the planning system is to weigh up those harms and benefits and reach a conclusion as to whether or not the scheme should be acceptable. But we have a system whereby, the harms that occur tend to be happen quickly and in a constrained geographic area. So it might be more traffic, it might be the disruption from construction traffic, it might be the loss of a view. The benefits take longer and accrue over a wider area. So it's that amelioration of house price rises or economic growth or people moving into the area from somewhere else to be nearer their families. It's not immediately obvious, and the beneficiaries probably don't even know that they're going to be beneficiaries yet.
Yeah.
And yet we make decisions at a very local area, and we, where the harms are the greatest, and we do that, and the people we task with doing that are people that have to be re-elected every 3 years.
Yes.
Aren't looking, councillors, like all politicians, like winning elections.
Yeah, of course.
That's their favourite thing.
Yeah.
So if you're saying to them, well, you can do something, make a decision that will be unpopular now and might hinder your chances of being re-elected, but will deliver significant benefit 5 years from now, what are you going to do?
Yeah, no, you are right, and I've read about this, and I've heard stories about this. There is actually a conflict because they want to be there with it through their term. They want to be re-elected. They want to be having continuous impact. But the problem is when it comes to housing, they can turn their own community against them, whereby the medium and longer term impact is positive, is valuable, but it might seriously risk them not getting re-elected, and that poses them quite a significant conflict, doesn't it? Fantastic points there, and really eloquently put as well. And as you've touched on, it is a complex system. And very briefly, I just want to touch on a point before we move on. You mentioned, nutrition neutrality, nutrient neutrality. Sorry, it was a tongue twister for me, but there was a bit of positivity in the news recently, and then even more recently, the House of Lords voted against the government's plans to make that process significantly easier for developers. Do you have any comments on that, or what's your thoughts on what's happened recently?
Oh, yeah, well, this is something else that we could do a full half hour on, isn't it? But
It is.
I mean, I think it is. It's nicely symptomatic of the challenges we have in building more homes in general. That nutrient neutrality is not a new issue. I think we're getting on for 4 years now since Natural England wrote to the Solent authorities and advised them not to grant new planning permissions. And it's taken all that time for the government to come up with a proposal to remedy it. And the solution, well, whatever the right solution, the fact of the matter is that new homes are a fraction of the issue. The overwhelming majority of nitrate and phosphate pollution, which is what this is all about, comes from sewage works that are operating over capacity and need upgrading, or excessive use of fertilisers running off into watercourses. There's all sorts of various different figures that are bandied around in terms of the impact of urban areas. It's maybe about 15% of the runoff comes from urban areas.
Right.
But new build homes are a fraction of urban areas.
Yeah.
And of course, houses, and the issue with new build homes is it's the extra sewage that it generates going into sewage works that are over capacity. But houses don't use the toilet. People do. And and houses don't magically create new people. It just shuffles around where they are.
Yeah.
So there are two ways that you can deal with this. Everybody agrees that what we need to improve water quality in our rivers. There's no dispute or debate around that. And there are two ways we can deal with it. One is that we can seek to address the main cause of the issue, which is to try and educate farmers about how better to use their fertilisers. There's some stuff around slurry pit management and things like that. We can, Ofwat can insist that water companies upgrade sewage work so that they have sufficient capacity for the inflows. Or the alternative, which is the route that we seem to have gone down, is to micromanage where people poo. And to say, you're not allowed to go to the toilet in that river catchment, but you are in that one. So that's how we're going to control where the houses are going to be built, which is just crazy. It's just absolutely crazy. And we end up with this inverted, we've ended up with this sort of inverted system whereby, the principle in law has always been the polluter pays. That if you cause pollution, you pay to remedy it. And now we've got house builders having to pay polluters to stop their polluting activity in order to free up space for the sewage flows from the new homes. So, there are stories about pig farmers charging developers to take parts of their farm out of production. There are stories about, I read one story about a developer buying a trout farm and taking that out of production because you're just bite and shut it down.
Yeah,
this is absurd.
Yeah.
When what it needs
That's
is
having a different harm then as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and what you need is a comprehensive, instead of this piecemeal approach of nibbling away at it and doing things that enable a particular development to come forward, but are actually not really very sensible in the long term. You need a more comprehensive approach that is around sewage works being upgraded. It is around strategic wetland areas to help absorb the runoff from fertiliser usage. But developers can't do that on an individual site basis. That needs to be done more comprehensively by government, and developers would be happy to fund that. If you work out what the cost of that is and divide it by every home that's going to be delivered in those river catchments over the next 15 years, it's not actually much per dwelling.
Yeah.
So the government had then come to this position of saying, well, look, we accept all of that, and therefore, to unpick it all, we're going to direct local authorities to ignore the advice from Natural England and say that they can assume that we're going to do all these other things about mitigation measures and upgrading sewage works, and we're going to fund it. There's £280 million of funding, much of which will get clawed back from developers. That they were going to do all of these things, and therefore it was okay for local authorities to assume that those things would happen, to assume that other regulatory regimes would do what they are supposed to do. And that proposed change in the law was thrown out just last night in the House of Lords, and in large part because the Labour Party decided to oppose it. And we've been told for some time now that Labour are on the side of the builders, not the blockers. They've been making some extremely positive and sensible noises about housing supply and housing delivery in the planning system, and it's unnerving that the first time there's been any sort of public backlash against new development, with the environmental lobby sort of in some cases it seemed willfully misunderstanding what the government was proposing to do. As soon as that pressure was applied, they've slipped into being blockers, not builders. And let's hope it's a one-off. They're saying the right things about wanting a comprehensive solution, but not just this way. It'll be very interesting to see, how it develops over the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, and again, just touches for all the listeners the complexities and the battles between, politics and just what the country needs and the local community needs. It is an ongoing and evolving process that is taking a long time and is still taking time. If you were, you've been in the business for a while now, Paul. So if you was to have any kind of words of advice or tips for either developers coming through the system to try to, build houses, take land through planning, what kind of how could you best prepare them?
Yeah, I tell them not to. I think I wouldn't underestimate how complicated and how difficult the planning system can be. And in navigating that, what I would say is I think there can be a temptation sometimes for developers, people in the development industry, to blame local authority planners, and they are not the villains here. They are extremely dedicated, talented people who are trying to make the best or navigate their way through a system that is barely fit for purpose. And I think if you can understand that and appreciate the time pressures and the financial pressures that they're all under, and listen to what they're telling you, and to try and understand the rationale and the motivation about what they're doing, you can get much better results through the process. We're a land promotion company, and land promoters have a reputation for whacking in planning appeals left, right and centre. But in our 15 years, we've gone to appeal twice.
Oh, really? Wow, that's actually surprising.
On both occasions, they were schemes that were refused against officers' recommendation.
Really? So you've taken a real collaborative approach with the authority.
And, there are examples where we have taken 13, 14 months to get a scheme through the local authority. And we've deliberately taken a time over it rather than, sort of ripping the cord and going to appeal as soon as we could, because it gets us a better quality outcome. And, if you can try and work with planning officers in local authorities, I do think that that's your best way usually. If, proactively engage with them, listen to what they're saying, discuss and debate it with them in a sensible sort of professional manner. And I think you do get much better quality outcomes that way.
So invest in, get that pre-application advice. Obviously, surround yourself with a good team that are experienced, know what to do. Listen to what they're saying, and try to come to the table with solutions to their concerns, rather than just going straight in for the application, straight to appeal if you don't get what you want, and just take a more collaborative approach that way. Is that?
Sounds like that's what you do already, so you've got it nailed.
Well, I will be honest, it is we do get frustrated. We do see the lack of resource in local authorities. I mean, getting 12 months before a response from the highways department, you do start running out of patience, and you do start blaming them. You're like, how can it be 12 months before you get a response on this, what's classed as a minor scheme? It's that's really challenging. And it's like, if it is resource, you've seen in the news recently, local authorities at risk of going bankrupt, as high up on the news in today as we're recording this. So the understanding under financial pressures is just, what do you do when a planning officer in the private market, a planning consultant, can be paid up here, and a planning officer is getting offered down there? It's going to cause issues, isn't it?
Yeah, they are dramatically under-resourced and understaffed, and remedying that will make a big difference. But I think one of the other things that we don't talk about enough is to try and understand, you run a business, Dorian. There are two ways you can increase capacity. You can have more, you can buy in more capacity, or you can stop doing some things that you already do, and use what you've got more efficiently. And we never talk about what our planning team's doing that they don't need to. Every time there's a reform or a change, it tends to layer more responsibilities onto the planning system. And we talked about nutrients, and that's kind of a good example, that we've got a parallel regulatory regime here that deals with pollution, but the planning system is having to intervene and mediate that, and decide whether or not it's operating effectively. There are lots of other examples. You don't get a planning consent that says that conditions that the homes have to be built in accordance with building regs. It's just assumed that that's happened, and you go and get building regs approval, and it's a separate regime, and the planners have nothing to do with it. Yet there are other third-party approvals, like sign off from the environmental health team that the remediation strategy is suitable.
Yeah.
Or sign off from the Environment Agency about your ability to discharge into that particular watercourse.
Yep.
Why does the planning system even need to be involved in that? If you secure a planning consent for a scheme that it turns out you can't successfully remediate, or that you can't drain because you can't get the discharge consent, does it? That's your lookout, isn't it? Why should the planning officer have to be sat in the middle playing piggy in the middle, forwarding on emails from you to the EA and their responses back to you, when there is already another regime that does that? And I think they're just a couple of examples, but I think there are things that we should stop and think about and say, are the things that the planners are doing that they don't need to, and can we free up capacity in that way?
Definitely, and again, we'll move on the point, but just from one of our experience, we've found, I don't know if you found this, but the planning officers, they have to, in the most part, get a across the board consensus and approve from all consultees, even if it's minor details which hold up applications. That so we spend a lot of time, which can cause delay on a particular site where agree in the bin location, but we couldn't get the approval from the department that deals with waste, because they didn't respond for 4 months. But then the whole scheme went on stop. The plan officer couldn't make a decision. It becomes really difficult. Then we had a 5-minute meeting on site, and it was finally, when we finally got there, and it was all agreed.
Yeah.
All right, we'll have the bins over there then. Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, but bins are important. The first rule of local politics is don't mess with the bins.
Yeah, yes, of course. Don't mess with the bins. Yeah. Look, fantastic points, really are. And, and again, thank you so much for coming on here. But if I could, if you could leave this chat today with any final bit of advice to, like I said, landowners, or looking to work with land promotion companies like yourselves, or could you give any advice to them of what they could look for in a land promotion company?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I would say is, and hopefully it's come across from the discussion today a little bit, but don't underestimate how complicated the planning system is. I often meet landowners who start out with the perception that they can sort of send a write to the council and tell them that they're happy for their site to be developed, and then they just sit back and it happens, and the council will do all the survey work and make the decisions, and they don't need to engage in the process. You do need to engage with them, because as we talked about, that it's complicated and they're under-resourced. So the more work you can do on their behalf, the more information you can give them, the better a chance that you've got. I'd also say it's never too early to start engaging with a local authority. So if you have a site that you think could be suitable for development in a future plan, starting early to have those discussions helps build relationships, helps address concerns, is a really important way of doing it. And, when you're choosing a land promoter, I think, ultimately a lot of it comes down to whether you get on with them. You're talking about 5 or 10 year relationships. That's how long it's going to take to deliver the site. And you want to make sure that, you get on with the person, that they've got the expertise and the knowledge to be able to deliver the site for you, both in terms of planning and development, and knowing what house builders need. You want to make sure that who are the individuals that are actually going to be doing the work. I always say that our USP is we don't want to be big. We've got a decent number of sites, but few enough that I can project manage them all. So that if you're working with us, I'm project managing your site. I've got a team that help me. But you can ring me at any point and I can tell you what's happening with your site. There are other organisations where you might meet somebody with a director word in the job title early on, but you end up with somebody more junior doing the work day to day. And that might work for them if they've got loads and loads of sites, because the law of large numbers will come to the rescue. But if you're a landowner, you've got a sample size of 1 usually. Yeah. It's either succeed or fail.
No, you're right. Definitely.
And I want to give you the best chance of succeeding, which is why we work the way that we do, really, and have a small number of sites with genuinely tailor-made planning strategies and senior people running the projects, because we think that gives people the best chance. And whether we succeed or fail can be genuinely life-changing for people. So let's make sure we're giving them the very best possible chance of being able to pick the palm tree, as I always put it.
No, that absolutely makes sense. And from my perspective, definitely come across here very, very genuine, very knowledgeable, and you can see why you've got some fantastic sites under your belt and working with some great landowners. As a final point, if anybody wants to reach out to you, what areas do you operate in, and how could they connect with you?
Yeah, well, we cover the whole of England and Wales. We're based in Manchester, but we cover the whole of England and Wales. If you want to get in touch with us, our website, strategiclandgroup.co.uk, has got all our contact details on there, as well as loads of sort of resources. We call them essential guides about explaining basic elements of the planning system, and some more complex sort of analysis and research on there. Or you can just drop me an email. My email address is pauls@strategiclandgroup.co.uk. And I'm always happy to hear from people about projects that they think we might be of interest to us.
Fantastic. Paul, thank you so much for coming on again. I really do mean it. It's been a tremendous value, and I'm sure the audience will think so too. Thank you.
No, thanks, Dorian. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Cheers.